Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Living, where we air every Wednesday in Vancouver on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio. My name is Marc Caron, and today I'd like to introduce you to my co-host and partner in production, Michael Kraus. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here, Mark, and thank you for inviting me to
Well,
co-host the show with you.
Hey, my pleasure. After our week last week where we co-hosted the MAPS Psychedelic Science 2025, the integration, which was a complete honor, especially based on, the work that we do with conscious living in the world of plant medicine, the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, and our podcast there. It was just a real pleasure to work with you again in the studio and be able to introduce talks and have dialogue in regards to a subject that is certainly, near and dear to both of us. As we've seen the impact, we've not only seen it, we've experienced it in our own journeys and experiences. But I just thought, what a great opportunity for our subject matter today that we talk more about plant medicines and the power that these psychedelics have to create healing for people around the globe, for so many different, ailments. But, it's something that is super impactful, and the word's got to get out there because these medicines are quite powerful.
Yeah, and thank you for allowing me to dance today and dance with you at Psychedelic 2025, the MAPS conference in Colorado. It was extremely powerful for me to be hosting or co-hosting the live stream with you, and particularly to see the renaissance of psychedelics and how people are coming together. And they had over 10,000 attendees at the conference. I think 680 speakers on 14 stages.
It's
And
crazy, right? Like it's just the logistical side of it is
yeah,
overwhelming to me
and
thinking about it.
and within it, just the beauty, the sheer beauty of all the people that came together with one common interest, really, and that is the healing of ourselves and others. And it's so much needed in this day and age. And I believe we all have traumas. We carry those traumas with us, from perhaps an early age, or through traumas that happened throughout our lifetime that were inflicted upon us. And it's so important. And I believe we have a responsibility to heal ourselves.
Absolutely. And, this kind of leads into our guest today. But before we introduce our guests and bring them in, the one thing I thought was really incredible about the conference with MAPS last week, and for those of you who don't know, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, who have been working since 1986 to, bring proper scientific studies in regards to using some of these medicines, and not just plant medicines, but molecular medicines such as MDMA that they use for PTSD. And what really stuck out the most for me last week with the MAPS conference was the amount of conversation around iboga and ibogaine for PTSD, addiction, and so many other things that affect people in the world today. And that's kind of where we're going to go down the road with our guest today is the iboga side, but just the power that these medicines have to create the healing and to create that opening for growth.
Yeah, and I think specifically for plant medicine, it's really also fascinating how we have to recognize that the plants are actually reaching out to us to say, I'm here to help you heal. I'm here for the betterment of humanity. And many of us are hearing the calling right now, and many are listening.
Well, it's like that quote it sticks in my mind from Susan Leopold in 2023, where she says, you know, if the plants are talking to you and you can hear them, you better listen. And I find it funny, yet it's true. And if we take a look at the indigenous cultures throughout history, when we look at ayahuasca, iboga, and so many, peyote and San Pedro and things, how these shamans and medicine people were able to know what to do and how to mix certain things and the impact that they have. So it really goes to show the indigenous connection to nature and the natural world.
Yeah, and also listening to those who can see. So when you talk about the indigenous wisdom and the knowledge, and on the other hand, we talk about Western science and the need for us to perhaps verify it in a Western scientific concept, whereas the indigenous science has been um, present for the last thousands of years by passing the wisdom down generation to generation to generation, learning from it and actually experiencing it. So it's actually an understanding of the medicine, not a belief system, perhaps that comes out of Western science, um, to believe that it works. First Nations peoples, they understand it works, and which is, I mean, we look at our governments and the health institutions, and there seems to be a little bit of a lack of or a delay of acceptance of what this psychedelic renaissance really is, and the power that it holds and the
Yeah.
potential that it brings forward.
Well, and what I love is how science is proving what the indigenous people have known, like say, for thousands of years. Like they know, they understand. It's something that's just a knowing versus, Westerners, and we get in our head and everything else. We need to see and know the science behind it. And as I've always said, is I love the social proof, the stories of healing and transformation that people have had working with these medicines. And today, our guest is going to share his story in terms of what's happening in the world today for first responders, military, police, paramedics, firefighters, anybody who's on the front lines of keeping us safe in today's world, and the impact that that has on them. Because I couldn't imagine the things that they would have to deal with, and cleaning up, and I just, to me, it's almost unfathomable. And when I think about it, it makes me sick to my stomach, quite frankly. So, you know, maybe without further ado, we can introduce our guest and bring him in and hear his story of transformation in regards to his medicine work. And we'll just have a conversation around that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it. Oh, your microphone went mute, Michael. No, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Now you can.
Now we can.
Let's try this
Ah, the
again.
joys. All
Jeremy
right.
Jeremy Hudec joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in 2005. During his service, he began experiencing a range of challenges, including depression, isolation, insomnia, emotional numbness, avoidance behaviors, negative self-perceptions, hyper-arousal, and heightened reactivity. In 2010, he was formally diagnosed with PTSD and referred to a local clinic specializing in treating military veterans and RCMP members. Jeremy received regular treatment for the next 5 years and resumed treatment again in 2022. Jeremy first learned about the treatment involving ibogaine through a podcast where the host described its use as a plant-based psychedelic traditionally used in West Africa. The discussion highlighted its application in treating opioid addictions and other mental health conditions. The conversation also touched on 5-MeO-DMT, another naturally occurring compound known for its profound therapeutic effects. Intrigued, Jeremy began researching these treatments further and discussing the possibility with his loved ones. For the first time in a long time, he felt a powerful sense of hope, a feeling that compelled him to take a chance on this unconventional path. Welcome to the program, Jeremy.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Mark.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here, Jeremy, and we look forward to sharing your story with our community and people who may be looking to, for alternative therapies or modalities to, heal them. So maybe you can tell us about your story and, as a RCMP officer, what you had to deal with, and just, fill us in and take us along your story.
Sure. I think for me, really, it began in my teens. When I was deciding on my path for my life, I just felt this urge that I wanted to serve, that I wanted to be part of something bigger than me, that was more important than me, help those that couldn't help themselves. I had a passion for airplanes and for flying, and I thought at the time that um, the Air Force would be a good calling for me. So that was my goal. I went out and I got my pilot's license, and I went to Mount Royal College, and I took their aviation program there and finished off with as a trained, fully commercial rated pilot. The Air Force decided my eyesight wasn't good enough, so I got disqualified from air crew status. But in the meantime, I just worked and kind of just tried to figure out what I was going to do. And then, I remember we had a neighbor when I was growing up that lived across the street from my mom and dad. He was in the RCMP, and I remember one time he'd said to me, "Oh, why don't you join the Mounties?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, man, I want to fly. I want to fly." And so I just kind of discounted that. But I got to thinking about it more and more, and it really aligned with how I felt about service and helping others and everything else. So I started down that path. Um, like Michael said in the intro, I graduated from Depot in the fall of 2005, and my first post was a small town in East Central Alberta. Um, and it was I think I mean I don't know if any amount of training can really prepare you for what you face. You leave Depot and you think I got this thing under control, not a problem. But then you hit the street and you realize I don't know anything, and it's not training, and it's real, and it means something. Um, I don't know if I was fully prepared for what I got myself into, to be honest with you. But I mean, I was there and I was in it, and I was going to make the best of it and do what I needed to do. We were horrifically understaffed. That particular detachment I went to, people had got transferred, or they were on sick leave, or they just up and quit. And during that summer, they had numerous members come in just filling in spots, and they were just taking files. They weren't really investigating anything. They were just taking files, stacking them up, and just taking the overtime and leaving. So when I got there, man, it was go, go, go. There was no time off. There was none. Um, when I wasn't working, I was on call. That's the way it was. So, it wasn't uncommon to go weeks without a day off. And you go out, work your working night shift or your day shift, and then you might get called at 10 o'clock and be out all night again, and then got to work the next day. Of course, you flex your hours as best you can, but I was very quickly burnt out. I mean, and I was dealing with the things that you see police officers deal with on a day-to-day basis. You're dealing with, impaired driving, you're dealing with domestic abuse, you're dealing with sexual assaults, you're dealing with, assault with a weapon, there's thefts, there's fraud, there's all those things, fatal car accidents, all those things that police officers deal with, you know, dealing with loved ones who've lost somebody, that's, you know, as they say, so, sometimes they expect police officers to be, problem solvers and social workers all wrapped in one, right? And we're not that. But I was very quickly burnt out, and by the summer of 2006, I very much remember just, I didn't really know what was wrong with me. I knew something was wrong. Um, I'd go out of the house and I wouldn't remember what I did while I was working. I couldn't remember where I went, who I talked to, where I went. Just it was blank. I'll get back and I'm just kind of looking around the house, and I didn't have a family at the time, so it was lonely. I'd put my uniform on, and I just start crying for no reason. I don't know why. I just didn't know why. I wasn't sleeping. I thought it was my bed. So I went and bought new furniture and everything else, thinking that wasn't, um, and then uh, family member, she said, you don't seem right. You need to go get some help. So I went and found some help, and I was diagnosed with depression, but it was PTSD. I just didn't get diagnosed with it, and I was off for a bit, and they dosed me up on antidepressants and sleeping pills and sent me back out, and it was tough. It was a pretty high dosage, about 275, 300 milligrams a day, antidepressants just to kind of get you out coping. It was a lot, and that was kind of my life for the next while, till got back down to my next post in south of Calgary here, and I remember we went to an attempted suicide, and um, we ended up saving that individual's life. Um, but I remember the next day just had this feeling in my stomach. I shouldn't be here. There's something wrong. There's this, I was tired all the time and just irritable and just all these things and the nightmares and the hypervigilance. And I wasn't feeling very well. And I knew something was up. So I got a hold of the force psychologist, and I ended up being taken off the road for a while. And that while ended up being 2 years. And that 2 years was tough, like, I was at the OSI clinic twice a week for the most part, doing EMDR and group therapy and talk therapy and exposure therapy and all these different modalities of treatment. And I was in group therapy sessions with Afghanistan war veterans and fellow RCMP officers, and listening to their stories and hearing how the things that they are encountering and everything else. And you're dealing with all these feelings of, I'm not worthy to be here in this place, I don't deserve to be here, all these things, kind of went on like that, and I ended up getting back on the road in 2012, and then in the spring, summer of 2013, of course, we had the floods in Calgary here and High River and Okotoks. So by that point, I was starting to get pretty burnt out again, and um, you know, by the fall of 2013, I was in a bad spot again, and then I ended up getting in a pretty severe car wreck when I was on duty. I was responding to another car accident, and I was driving down the road. I had my lights and stuff on, and I remember thinking we had some freezing rain and snow the night before, and I remember thinking, I should probably slow down a bit. Roads are probably a little bit slippery. Coming around the curve, and this truck kind of got out of the way, and then I kind of looked up ahead and I realized, well, that truck's not moving. And then as I got closer, I realized there was another car wreck. There was another car wreck. There was literally that the pileup happened seconds before I got there. There's no way I could have known it was there. But anyways, I tried to stop the car and nothing happened. And I plowed into the back end. I remember it was like a 1-ton flat deck truck, and it had like cinder blocks on the back of it. It was like a masonry truck. That's the last thing I kind of remember as I hit the back end of that truck. Um, it was around 100 kilometers an hour, 105, 110, somewhere in there. And um, I remember coming to and just trying to hit the radio on the car to try to get help. And I just kept calling, and I finally realized, well, the car's broken. It's not going to work. And I remember trying to get my phone out of my jacket to try to call somebody. I couldn't remember anybody's number, so I'm just kind of scrolling through trying to find a number that I recognized. Got a hold of somebody, told them to come get help, and I think the only reason I survived that crash was because I had body armor on, and I was wearing my seatbelt, and of course the airbags, but I was pretty banged up. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was my last day on duty. Um, Things kind of spiraled for me a little bit from there. I was My neck was pretty banged up, and my hands and everything else from the crash. And the people that I worked with, some of them decided, for whatever reason, they didn't want to contact me anymore. They didn't want to meet I don't know why. They didn't want to be friends anymore. And then for whatever reason, my supervisors decided I needed to be charged, so they charged me for uh, driving too fast for the road conditions. I was the only one that was hurt in that collision. I didn't cause it, but yet I was the only one that was charged. And when I told them I felt like this was bullying and harassment, they said, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but you wrecked a brand new police car and someone needs to be held accountable for it." So I had to go to court and everything else, and it just further threw me in a spiral. Just I couldn't understand. I felt betrayed, and I felt angry, and I felt like I'd been abandoned, and I felt all these things. I didn't think that I did anything wrong to these people, but yet for some reason I was being held responsible, or I was that guy that they couldn't stand to be around anymore. Um, went to court. I won. I successfully defended myself, but and I thought they'd be better after that, and it wasn't. It was worse. So I put in a harassment complaint against my supervisor, and then of course the RCMP investigated themselves, and they said, well, it was unprofessional and it was inappropriate, but it wasn't harassment. So I mean, at that point, I knew it was time to go. I I I knew I'd never be promoted. I knew I'd never get to be in a plainclothes section. I knew my career as a police officer was done. And I remember gathering my uniform and packing into my truck and driving to the detachment to go sign my papers to leave and hand it all in. And I cried the whole way there. I couldn't believe this was the way it was when this was how it was ending. I couldn't believe it. It was, yeah, like I said, I felt angry and I felt betrayed and I felt sad that this is how it was going. I finally left in 2015, and you know, it took a while for that kind of relief to kick in. I was starting to look for other work, and as the years time passed, I started having a family, and I got into the private sector, and I realized that I was starting to have some things pop up that I didn't really realize was there before. I was starting to get really angry with the kids a lot, and yelling, and I really no patience, and just felt disengaged, and just wanted to be left alone. And on the weekends, I wanted to drink and I wanted to party. That's that was kind of a relief for me, a release for me. I felt like I didn't have this weight on me anymore. Um, this kind of went on for a while, and ended up going back. Well, I had appealed a Veterans Affairs decision, and as I was talking to the fellow from Veterans Affairs, he asked me, he just happened to ask me how I was doing otherwise because he was just following up with the decision. And I told him I'm not doing very good. I'm not doing very good. And he goes, well, do you want to go back? Would you like to go back to the OSI clinic? And I said, well, I kind of feel a little guilty about that. I mean, I know that there's people waiting to go, and I know there's people worse off than I am. I don't want to take up a spot. And they're like, well, you deserve to be there just as much as they do. So if we make the referral, will you go? And I'm like, yeah, I'll go. So that kind of started another, few years of therapy. And again, I was, CPD and CPT and talk therapy, and my meds were pretty much straightened out by this point. But I'd quit taking sleeping pills when the kids were born, but I was using marijuana to help me sleep and help me relax. I just had a terrible time sleeping. Nightmares, and I'd wake up throwing punches and kicks in the middle of the night, and it was that was not good. Um, and I remember last spring driving home after yet another session and thinking to myself, this is as good as my life is going to get. I'm 45 years old, and if I'm lucky, I have another 40 left in the tank. And this is as good as it's ever going to be, and this is as good as I'm ever going to feel. And this sucks. Um, I had nothing to grasp onto. It just felt like it. You look in the mirror and you just hate what you see and you're tired of it, and it sucks. It's this heavy weight that's just on your shoulders all the time. And you feel like you're broken. You feel like you're not worthy. You feel like, yeah. And it kind of, that feeling just kind of went on for a while. I just kind of accepted this was the new normal for me. And then I would say May, early June last year, I was listening to a podcast. Just like Michael had said, it was a Navy SEAL talking to an Army Ranger. And it wasn't even the topic of the conversation. It was just a quick 10 to 15-second sidebar conversation they had about this therapy they did in Mexico where, oh, I don't drink anymore and I feel lighter and I feel all these things and more engaged with my family. And then back onto the conversation. I didn't really think anything of it. I really didn't. But I finished the podcast, and then a few days later, I got to thinking. I'm like, man, I wonder what they were talking about. I should look into that. So of course I go back into the podcast, and it's 5.5 hours long, and I couldn't find it. I was like, man, there's no way I'm going to find this 10 seconds in 5.5 hours. Like, there's no way. I'm like, you know what? I'll reach out to the host on Twitter. No problem. That's a lot easier than this. And if he doesn't answer, then I'm no worse off than I was before. So heck with this. I'll just write him on Twitter. So reached out to him, said, hey, Sean, fan of your show. There's a little bit about me. I heard, you mentioned this therapy that you did in Mexico. Um, what was the name of that? I'd really like to look into it. Thanks again. Talk to you soon. Um, Next day he gets back to me. I couldn't believe it. And he goes, hey man, it's called ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT. And I was like, Iba what? I've never heard this in my entire life. What are they talking about? Um, and 5-MeO DMT, I couldn't get the numbers and the letters right in it. That's start. I just this all of this to say it was a completely foreign world to me. No idea. Okay, well, whatever. I'll put it in the Googler, and we'll find out what comes out of that. So put it in. And the Stanford study came up pretty quickly. I remember there was a testimony from a Navy SEAL from the Psychedelic Times. I remember reading this, and I was just like, "What? Like this? Okay, and reading the study, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And then there was this organization called the Mission Within came up, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, man, that's really geared towards special operations. That is not me. That is definitely not me. Um, so I just kind of left that alone. But I mean, I found some more podcasts, and actually the host of that, Sean Ryan, he did his own journey with the medicine. So I listened to his story, and I was just like, wow, that is incredible. Like, I can't believe that. And then he'd interviewed other Navy SEALs that had done it. Marcus and Amber Capone were on his show, and Marcus and Amber Capone now they run Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions in the United States that help Navy SEALs and special operators heal. But fellows, I mean, I listened to that podcast, and I remember like I'd take my kids to karate, I'd be out in the truck listening to this podcast, and I would have tears coming down my face because it wasn't so much his military service I could relate with. It was the feelings that he was experiencing and the things that his wife was describing. And I'm like, I can relate with these people. Like, and it broke my heart. And it was very introspective in some ways too, because you can, like you said, I could relate with it. And all the while I'm doing these things, I'm sending stuff to my wife. Never talked about it. I'm just kind of sending her stuff. Hey, check this out. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. And this kind of went on for a bit. And I reached out to the Mission Within, and I just said, I noticed you're again, a little bit about me. I noticed you're very geared towards special operations. I said, have you helped civilians before? If not, that's cool. But could you point me in a direction where I can go? Because this is something I think I'd like to look into a little further. And they got back to me within a day or two. And they said, "Oh yeah, sure. We've helped lots of police officers or firefighters. Please click here for your introductory meeting." And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Let's just hold on. That's a little fast for me. This let's just hold on." Um, so anyway, I remember we went out for my birthday for supper, and this would have been probably the start. This was the start of July of last year, and I'm kind of sitting there, and I'm kind of mentally preparing to have a discussion with my wife about going to Mexico, and mentally kind of preparing myself not for a fight, but just maybe a disagreement because it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, and I wasn't sure how she was going to react to it. But I said, "Well, have you seen that stuff that I've been sending you?" And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, I saw it." And I'm like, "What did you think?" And without even blinking an eye, she goes, "Jeremy, you have to go. You have to go." And I said to her, I said, "Laura, like that's like," she goes, "You can't put a price on your health." And I said, "Laura, it's a lot of money." She goes, I don't care. We can afford it. You need to go." So I said, "Okay." So I reached out again and I clicked the link to get to set up the intro. And I have these intro meetings with their intake workers and these ladies, like they're the nurse and the intake workers. And I was fortunate. I share an office with my coworker, and he happened to be on holidays at the time, thankfully. So I set up these early morning meetings with him so that there wasn't a whole lot of people in the office when we had these discussions. And she'd be telling me what to expect, and I was just full on breaking down in the office. And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What you're describing to me does not seem real. Like, I have tried everything and I have never experienced what you're telling me. Like, this does not seem real. There might as well be a unicorn farting rainbows in the corner of my office right now. Like, this does not seem real." I and I just had tears coming down my face, and she's like, "I promise you it's real. I promise you." I mean, what can you do but trust it, you know? And I for the first time in almost 20 years, fellas, I felt hope. And I cannot tell you what that means, what that meant to me. To feel like even if it's 5% better, that's worth it. And I'd never met a SEAL or an Army Ranger before in my life prior to this. I grew up in a small town northwest of Calgary. I'd never met a SEAL or a Ranger. But they struck me as very no nonsense, no bullshit sort of people. And if they're sending their friends and they're sending their teammates and they keep sending and they keep going, there had to be something to it. Had to be. So all I had was this hope that things could be maybe just 5 or 10% better. And and that's what I held on to. And the nurse is like, you need to get off your antidepressants. You can't be on this stuff when you go down there. I'm like, okay. Um, and I wasn't looking forward to that. I've been on this stuff for 18 years, 19 years. Granted, my dosage wasn't as high then as it now as it was in the start. Like I said at the start, I was up to about 275, 300 milligrams a day, and now I was maybe 50 milligrams. So, and I changed through different medications over the years, but thankfully I just had that one. I wasn't on sleeping pills anymore, and I mean it could have been a heck of a lot worse. But I'm like, you need to go to your doctor and come up with a plan because you need to be. I want to say they wanted you 3 weeks clear before you went down to Mexico uh, to go through the medicine. So I went to my doctor, and I'm kind of talking to him about it, and I'm telling him I'm gonna do psychedelics, doc. And he's like, "What?" He's like, what medicine?" And so I told him, and I said, "I never heard of that." Okay. And then he's like, "Well, let me just have a look here." So he brings up this psilocybin study, and no, that's not what I'm doing, but okay, it's whatever. So he's going in, he's like, "Oh, it looks like they had some good results here," and oh, but look, they also they talk about suicidal ideation. And I said, "Doc, look, let's just stop here for a sec. I said, look, I know what you're trying to do. You want to educate me. You want to make sure I'm well informed to make the proper decisions and all those sorts of things. And my doctor had been nothing but supportive all through the time I've known him. Like he's a great physician. I'm lucky to have him. Um, but I said, I told him, I said, I have been on literally every antidepressant out there. I have experienced every one of those side effects, and never, ever, once, ever has a doctor told me I should not take an antidepressant because of these side effects. So I said, either get on board or get the F out of the way because I'm doing this. And he's like, no, he's like, Jeremy, yes, I'm going to help you. We'll come up with a plan. Like, this was my chance, and I wasn't going to let somebody talk me out of it. And so we came up with a plan to take me off the antidepressants, and I got to be honest with you, it was horrific. I was so sick last summer, just the antidepressant withdrawals, um, nausea, and I had the brain zaps and dizziness and vertigo, and it made me incredibly irritable and had headaches and like I'd had that block. You're on that antidepressant, so you have that block. You don't really feel anything. And now that block isn't there, and I'd be like in the truck bawling my face off to a song that came on the radio, or I'd just be standing in the garage and I'd start crying, and Laura's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I don't know what's going on," like no idea, all over the map. And quite honestly, like those side effects, I think I started weaning off at the end of July, and those side effects didn't stop until probably first week of October. It was a long, long, and like I was on a small dose. I can't even imagine what it'd been like if I would have been on a heavier dose. Can't even imagine what that would have been like. But they had sent me other stuff. I had to clean up my diet. So like, 2 weeks out, I had to stop drinking. So I stopped drinking 2 weeks out. So did that. Had to stop using marijuana. Did that. Cleaned up my diet. First of all, you need to get rid of sugar and processed food. It's not a problem. And then literally by 3 days before you leave, you're pretty much plant-based. Um, but I took it seriously. I did what I was supposed to do because I wanted to get the most out of it. So I flew down to San Diego on Halloween last year, and I got to be honest with you guys, I didn't sleep very good the night before. I was pretty nervous. Um, I remember I was up awake at 4:30 in the morning, and I was like, I might as well just get up and go for a run. And I think that was the first time in my life I'd ever been awake before the sun rose, and I was on a route and a run. And I remember looking out and I saw the sun come up over San Diego Harbor, and just incredible. Walk to meet the guys, the meeting place, and I get there and there's this little bald-headed fella. He says, "You going to Mexico?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir, I am." He's like, "You're in the right spot." I'm like, good, good. So he introduced himself. That he was the operations coordinator for the weekend, and then the other guys were there and they were milling about. And you could see like a lot. Some of them had a lot on their mind, and I probably felt the same way. But we all kind of met each other there. And first stop, like we so everybody into the van, okay. And there was this fellow there, and we were kind of discussing. I think we felt the same way. And he goes, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm doing this. And I said, man, I left I left my country to fly to a foreign country to get in a van with seven guys I'd never met before to go to another foreign country to do a medicine I'd never heard of in my life. I must be out of my damn mind. And he's like, yep, yep, I'm with you on that one. But in we went, got in the van. First stop was cardiologist's office in Tijuana. We all had our screening done there. Ibogaine, as you guys know, can have some cardiac side effects to it, so they want to make sure that we're healthy enough to undergo the medicine. Everybody checked out there fine. We got to the house and we had we did a urine screen there, testing for you know drugs and alcohol again on the urine, and they went through our bags to make sure we didn't have anything there either. They put our IV ports in. and just kind of like showed us around the house and gave us a layout of the land and what to expect. And um, that night we were going to start the Ibogaine ceremony around 7:30 or so. And the thing about this house, it it was it felt right. It was decorated. It was furnished appropriately. It was decorated appropriately. You felt like, yeah, they had the medical component there to look after you medically, but they were also looking after your mind and your soul at the same time. And that was, it was, it was like they had a reverence for it a little bit, like it was done very respectful, and it just, if it didn't feel like you didn't feel like you were a cow being led to slaughter, I guess, for lack of a better term. Um, so that night we got there and we get around the table to do the start the ceremony. First thing we did is you have these little sheets of paper and said, okay, write out your intentions. What do you want to get after? And in some ways, I'm pretty fortunate. I mean, I'd been through enough therapy at this point that I kind of was very aware of the things that I wanted to deal with. And I'm not, I had no problem sharing with you. Like, I wanted to be more involved with my family. I wanted to feel joy and happiness again. I felt like I didn't really feel truly happy. I felt like I hadn't felt happiness in ever. Um, I wanted to be free of the bitterness and anger at the end of my career. I wanted to feel self-worth again. All these things, I wanted to be free. There was an event. Um, there was a suicide that occurred when I was in my first post, and it was intertwined with another investigation, but the suicide occurred, and I had felt responsible for this man's death. I felt like I had driven him to that suicide, and I had I felt like I had the burden of this man's death on my shoulders for the last 14 years, and I just could never seem to get over that. I mean, just couldn't seem to get over it. So that was one of my other intentions. We got up there, and then there was also things. What would you like to say goodbye to? So there was a list of stuff, and we got up. We could read it out to the group, or we could just keep it to ourselves. And after we were done reading it, we put it in this. We lit the candle there. We lit it on fire, and we put it in this large ceramic bowl and let it burn, and just kind of said what we needed to say. And then we went and sat down, and we all kind of went through this ceremony. And then the facilitator says, "Okay, guys, we're all adults here. I'm not going to force you. We are not going to force you to do this medicine. You can take this. This is your own choice. If you decide you don't want to do it, that's not a problem. We'll figure it out. Not a big deal. But if this is what you choose to do, if you look over on that shelf, there's 5 little wooden bowls with your names on it. When you're ready, please go over and pick up your bowl and bring it back." So we went up there and these little wooden bowls, and found mine with my name on it, and there's 2 little pills in there. And I'm like, okay. So get back, and he's like, okay, hold that bowl in your hand and say what you need to say to the medicine. So I don't honestly remember what I said. Um, I don't remember what I said, but I do remember looking at the bowl, and I remember looking at those 2 little pills sitting in there. And he said, okay, when you're ready, fellas, on your own time, there's some water on the counter. Take them, and when you're ready. So all of us just back they went. The next day, he goes, I had to kind of stop myself from chuckling, because he goes, I've had grown men sit there for 2 hours looking at those pills, wondering if they're going to take them or not. But in my head, I'm like, this is what I'm here for. This is why I came this way. This is why I'm here. I'm taking these. Come hell or high water, I am doing this. I didn't know what to expect. So one by one, we went up to our room. We were kind of in this big room there was 5 beds in there. They all had IV and medical or EKG machines beside it, and they had kind of spiritual music playing in there, and they had these light machines you buy for your kids, and it puts little stuff on the ceiling and stuff, and they had like fake candles and crystals and indigenous blankets and stuff hanging off the walls. And it was, like I said, it was just tastefully decorated. It fit the situation, and you just felt like it was a safe place to be, you know. So yeah, we got up the stairs, and we were all saged and smudged, and I got a hug from Punky, and he says, "I love you, brother," and I said, "I love you too, man." He says, "You know, we'll see. I'll talk to you later." I said, "You bet." So I went and lay down, and you know, the nurses hooked you up to your machines, and you put your eye blind on and your headphones, and you just lay there and you wait. And they say, okay, no, it could take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours to kick in. Um, you know, could be less, could be more, depending on what your metabolism's like. So I remember laying there waiting. And they had said, you know, before they kind of given us some things to kind of expect. Okay, you might feel like really sick. So like they gave us some box breathing techniques to practice that if you to try to kick the nausea a bit. Also, you know, like you're gonna feel like your limbs are really heavy, but you need to move really slow, because if you move too fast, you're gonna feel like you're spinning and rolling, and that's gonna bring on that nausea again. So they said if you're moving, just move very slowly. Okay, fine. Did that. And they said, okay, when it comes on, people describe that either like a metallic buzzing in their ears, or like a really metally crashing sound. And they said, just be open to it. Just, you know, be open. Don't fight it. Just be open to whatever comes. Check. Gotcha. All right. So I'm laying there. All of a sudden I hear this snoring. And that dude down the way, man, he must have been some tired, because he was snoring so bad. I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to focus on what I'm trying to do here? All I can hear is this guy snoring. And this is through the headphones. They got the music playing in the headphones, and I can hear this guy snoring. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to focus on what I'm supposed to do. And I ended up like putting earplugs in and taking the headphones off. I can't sleep on my back, so I'm trying to get comfortable and get, you know, kind of get all settled. And I remember at some point when I took when I was going to take the headphones off and put my earplugs in, the nurse came up and said, you know, how you doing? I'm like, I'm doing all right. And she's like, how you feeling? I'm like, I'm fine. She's like, have you had any visions? I'm like, no, definitely not. Definitely not. And, uh, and she said, okay, well, if you haven't felt anything, let's just, uh, let's just wait. We'll give you more. Okay. Didn't really want to do that, because, you know, things might, I didn't want to be messed up at 5 o'clock the next night. I waited there for a while. All of a sudden, like I kept saying to myself, "Are you there yet? Are you there?" Kind of like that was my way of saying staying open-minded. And all of a sudden, I hear this voice, "I'm here," and I was like, "Oh, okay." And it's like, "Do you want to go to work?" And I'm like, "Yep, sure do." And off we went. And I remember seeing like flying through the universe and seeing stars and constellations and comets, and like I could hear ice behind the comet, like, you know, if you're on a cold winter day and you can hear the snow blowing over the crusty or hear ice blowing over the crusty snow, that's what it sounded like to me. um Different images. um there was this blue screen, and in that blue screen there were these boxes, and in each of those boxes they're kind of flying up into my field of vision, and in each of those boxes I could watch my life from being a little boy up until now. And I saw videos of me. You know, it was obviously my birthday, and I was younger. I was, you know, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I had this, everybody's gathered around the table, and I had this look of just pure joy in my face. And I looked free, and I looked happy. And fellas, I didn't realize it at the time, but I had asked the medicine to show me joy and happiness. And it showed me that my life had been full of it. And I had just forgotten, you know, as you get older, um, all the trauma that I had experienced, I just forgotten. The next day, I cried and cried and cried and cried about that, you know. Um, all I could think about was what an incredible gift I had been given to be reminded of these things, you know. Um, Next day, we did a lot of journaling and discussing and talking and everything like that. Um, a lot of tears and everything else. On Sunday, we did 5-MeO DMT. I was the third of, we did this one at a time. I was the third of five to go. First dose is a handshake. And then after that, they said, okay, swallow it. When you take it and swallow it, it'll make the experience more deep. If you want more, try to keep the doses close together. When you want more, more, because it's tough to talk a little bit sometimes, I guess. Yeah, okay, can do that. So first dose, handshake, and I was just it. I could not believe what I was experiencing. I remember feeling that anxiety come in, and then just saying, no, just let it go. And so I did, and I just in that split second, all the pain, all the trauma, the sadness, the guilt, um, all these things that had been weighing me down, just like that, gone. And all I felt was joy and happiness and gratitude and peace. And I felt like I was wrapped in an infinite blanket of love. And I felt that I was being held in the hands of God and being told that I had worth and that I was loved and that I had purpose and I was worthy of everything that had been given to me. And it felt so amazing. I didn't know whether to laugh or whether to cry. I did both at the same time. And into my second dose, I mean, I remember these guttural screams coming out of me as well. Sorry. Apologizing to my wife and kids, saying how sorry I was that I wasn't the dad I should have been or the father I should have been, how much I had let them down, and how much of a privilege it was to have them in my life. And I cried. I cried. It's guttural screams, and like I don't know where they came from, but they're there. Um, I got into my further doses, and at some point I had taken my eye blind off, and I kind of leaned over to the facilitator, to Punky. He was an ex-Navy SEAL. He'd been in the teams for 30 years. And I kind of put my hand around the back of his head, and I said, I need you to look at me. And he did. And I said, I cannot imagine the things that you've seen in your service, the friends that you've lost, how much you sacrificed. But I know your purpose and I know why you're here. And I said, if you ever need me, I swear on the life of my wife and my children, I will come. Because I have waited 20 years to find you, and you have given me my life back. And I hugged him like I've never hugged another man in my life, quite honestly. What is an incredibly liberating feeling just to be free of that pain and everything else that I'd been carrying. And I remember yelling and screaming. I got mad. I was yelling at God. I was yelling at myself. I was yelling at the RCMP. I was yelling at all these people that had wronged me. And I remember saying to God, I remember saying, like, how dare you? You tell me you love me. You tell me you care for me, but you left me to suffer alone. I lost my soul. My mind was lost. Everything was gone. And how dare you left me? You know, um, the words were a lot more colorful than that. I'll tell you that right now. But that was the gist of what I had said. Um, really fired up, really, really emotional. At the end, Punky says to me, "Hey, man, I just need you to lay down. I just need you to lay down." Backtrack. I remember at one point my hands had come over my head like this, and my hands were spread out so far, I felt like my bones are going to rip out of my skin. And as I'm doing that, I can feel this black sludgy goop kind of coming up through my stomach into my chest, shoulders, out my arms, and it was just flying out of my fingers, out of my hands. And I couldn't spread my hands out far enough to get it out fast enough. And it felt amazing, guys. I remember, like, again, laughing and crying at the same time. And after that was over, it felt like my body just folded up in on itself and just exploded into a billion particles. And it felt like each particle had a conscious. I could be everywhere but nowhere at the same time. I felt connected to everyone and everything. Again, that felt like I was being held in the hands of God. And I remember thinking, this is heaven. This is what it's like to die. I'm in heaven right now. This is incredible. And I just remember saying, thank you so much. I love you guys. Thank you so much. Um, at the end, after I calmed down and I laid back down, I had the eye blind on. And I remember looking up through my eye blind and I could see these little gray pieces kind of floating out of the sky. It looked like little pieces of ash floating out of the sky, coming down and kind of plopping into my shoulder, another piece into my leg, into my face, into my hands. And I experienced that explosion, that ego death, and all the stuff had been kind of carried out of my body. And now my body was being put back together with all that love and happiness and joy and peace that I had experienced. That was being put back in, being held back in. Um, I went back to San Diego feeling lighter than I've ever felt in 20 years. I remember texting my wife saying, I'm on the way back to San Diego. I don't know what to say, but just know I'm so grateful for you and the boys and for my life. And I can't wait to see you. Um, on the way back, I remember thinking how much of a travesty it was that either people didn't know about this or they knew about it, couldn't afford to go. And I just kept thinking, like how we changed this. I ended up sponsoring another veteran to go, but I knew one wasn't enough. How do I stop at one? So, um, especially after, like I said, I'd sat in these group therapy sessions with countless other veterans and listened to stories about substance abuse and trauma and divorce and all these things, and and when I was looking, there was nothing in Canada. There was nobody offering grants to go down to Mexico. There was nobody offering money to veterans to help them get this sort of treatment. And I guess I was just like, well, I guess that's got to be me then. So, um, after I had sponsored that vet, I decided it was time to start a charity. So that's how Project LifeSpark was born. And the name, well, Project LifeSpark. I remember laying on that mattress in Mexico and feeling that spark of life being put back into my body. And if I could bring that gift to somebody else, man, I tell you, it's like I told my board, we're not just healing individuals, we're healing families, relationships, and communities. It's like you throw a rock into a pond, you get that ripple. Well, you help that one individual, and you never know. It just keeps going. It just keeps going. So that's where we're at right now, fellas. It was a little bit of a slog there to find board members, and I was lucky to find a group of individuals that are very much aligned with my vision and my mission. Um, we went live and just at the end of May here, finally got registration from the province here, so we can operate. Our charitable status is pending, but our whole mission is to end suicide and mental illness in the veteran and first responder communities by providing funding so people can attend these retreats in Mexico. Part of it, we're going to we're going to do advocacy work, we're going to do education work, we're going to talk to government, we're going to talk to people in the industry, we're going to do all those things. But in my mind, I see this working like very much like it happened in the States. The veteran group was so strong, and again, they had to leave their country to find help. But the more people went, the louder the voice got, and pretty soon the voice is so loud they couldn't ignore it anymore. and then you get into Texas, and that's how I envision this happening. We're a little bit behind, but I think Alberta, for instance, I think we insurance will cover psychedelic therapy now in Alberta. So there is some precedent there we can use. It's it's not a total no, that's for sure. But for me though, the priority remains I need to get butts and seats down to Mexico. I just know there are people that are suffering, and I know how much can help because it helped me.
Well, Jeremy, I just want to thank you for sharing your story. I was just riveted and going through and really feeling you in terms of what you were sharing and what you've gone through, just as from an RCMP officer and, the journey that was and the fact that you are so committed to finding a solution, not being swayed by your doctor. There's so many things we can unpack in what you were sharing. And the thing that's, stuck out to me too is, just the, coming off of all those antidepressants and, the different drugs you were on and to, where you're at today and finding a pathway to help others. I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this story because this is what people need to hear, that there is a path forward, there is a way. And, big pharma is typically not going to help you on that side. And, these are plant medicines that have made a difference for you. Um, and I just, again, wow.
Y-
I'm floored.
I will
Um,
say that
by your story. I'm sitting here kind of gobsmacked right now. So,
I haven't touched a drop of booze since October 18th last year. I sleep better than I've slept in decades.
Well,
Like it used to take me an hour to fall asleep, and now I can lay my head down on the pillow in 5 minutes I'm out. And Laura's like, my wife, she's like, "Who are you? Like, who is this guy?" Like, I
well,
haven't had,
and
I haven't had a nightmare in I don't know how long. It just
um,
that's
I
great. And go ahead, Michael.
I also wanna honor you for your courage to step up and taking life into your hand and following your purpose and following your path and please whatever you're going to be doing with Project Life Spark, I would like to be there with you. I would like to support you in whatever, and I think I can speak for Mark too. um w- we want to support you. We want to be there along the way with you, and I believe ultimately it is about policy change, so we don't have to necessarily go down to Mexico to leave the country, leave our families behind, but have those treatments available in our cities across Canada. And there is no reason why we can't. There is no reason why we can't fulfill that dream of ours. And I know Mark was talking about it. I think it was Texas that just released $50 million of funding for ibogaine,
Federal funding, I believe it was.
federal funding for ibogaine research, and it's been matched with private donors. So there's $100 million that are going to go towards research, and I believe that we have to listen to not just we have to listen internationally what is going on, and I encourage our government and those who are making our policies to really open up their hearts and their minds to really hear what the results are. This is not woo woo. This is science that have been brought forward from ancestors and indigenous peoples for thousands of years. They know it works, and so thank you again for your beautiful, heartwarming, and touching and authentic story, and I wish you all and your family and how your wife stood with you, and what a beautiful story that is. So thank you for
And
sharing.
as well, Michael, I wanted to add, you know, when we take a look at, these medicines, as you were speaking, Jeremy, as you were looking at it from a PTSD depression point of view originally, but then not having, you're not drinking anymore or anything of that nature. When I was first introduced to iboga in the work that I do, it was, a big part of it was about addiction and the success that it has for addiction. And these are the stories, and again, that social evidence and proof that makes such a difference because it actually works. You've got some statistics on your website that are quite amazing. Just
Yeah.
how 47.7% of RCMP officers are screened with PTSD. RCMP members are 6 times more likely to screen positive for any mental health disorder. And as well, 34% have contemplated suicide. That's huge, right? And then the military males under 25 are 2.5 times higher risk of suicide as well from, what they're doing to serve us as citizens and, not just in Canada, but around the world. And then just, this interesting one, 141 suicide deaths in the CAF from 2012 to 21. By comparison, Canada lost 158 of its soldiers in combat in Afghanistan. It's just incredibly crazy when we look at these numbers. And then the suicide rate among paramedics is 5 times the national average, right, for paramedics. And these are things that I think is really important for people to understand. And it's where I really appreciate and thank you for your service and for all military. And whenever I meet anyone in the military, and law enforcement, I always thank them for their service because it's not something I've ever been part of in that sense. And I know the importance of some of peacekeeping around the world. So again, I thank you and encourage you to keep sharing your story because when you tell that part of in what you're sharing, it's like you actually felt hope that you can actually you know get through this and see a better life on the other side. And you're not the only one, and there's how many people are out there right now experiencing that same thing, wondering what they're going to do next.
Yeah.
And again, I just really thank you for the work you're doing with Project Life Spark. And for those of you, if you're interested in learning more, you can go to projectlifespark.org. It's in the comments below or wherever you're watching this at the time or listening. But there's some great information and great work about Jeremy and his story. Um, but yeah, it's just so much. And again, these medicines are serious. As you're talking about having EKGs and, medical tests and things, don't go out and do these things yourself. They can be very, very dangerous in that sense.
Yeah.
And especially when you're dealing in these aspects, getting off all the drugs you're on, your system's got to be clean. These are all important things that need to be considered because, you're seeing this stuff on sale on the internet and we get posted on our sites all the time. And it's like, never buy that stuff online. Never do these things by yourself alone. It's serious business, especially when you're dealing with what you're dealing with. So again, I'm just like, wow. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, and I look forward to being connected with you as you move forward and in the great work that you're doing. Because we have a community of people who are educators, practitioners, seekers as well. But people need to know that there is a pathway, and that the system itself that's provided by governments and standard medical treatments statistically don't work anywhere near the upwards of 88% that iboga has proven to show,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Nolan Williams speak at the psychedelic science conference last week, and he had mentioned when he got the results back from that study, he told his guys to go back and do it over again. He said that's wrong. You got to go back and do it again. Those results can't be right. And, they're right. Well, let's just wait 6 months. We'll find out. And then, yeah, sure, know, everything stayed very low. Just he goes, I had never seen results like this before. Anecdotally, I guess I had I had gone. I had my own mental health screen done on October 25th. Just before I had left to go to Mexico. and I was higher up on the scale. I got back. I had my 6 month screen in March, and my therapist is like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's got to be different. I know that."
Mm.
And so she showed it to me, and she goes, "Jeremy, I have never seen numbers this low at this clinic ever, ever." She was like, "I just this is incredible. Like, um, your PTSD is absolutely in remission." Um, and I knew that. I mean, I knew that, but um, to have it, you know, proven by, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't really know how those tests work, but I mean that there's evidence there that yes, this is real and it works. And I just want to say too, you talk about Texas. I had the pleasure of meeting a lot of those folks from Texas. So shout out to the Texans for greater mental health and Texas Ibogaine Initiative. Great bunch of guys and girls there, just doing great things.
Yeah, I want to thank, all the people who are doing the work and pushing this forward because it's not a necessarily an easy slog going against the FDA, the DEA, and all the clinical studies that need to support scientifically what's going on. And, we heard a lot about that last week at the conference, eh, Michael?
Yeah, and it's also about the public's perception, I think,
Mhm.
around psychedelics, because in I think a large percentage of the population think of psychedelics perhaps as party drugs, and completely dismiss the the therapeutic part of it, and the science around it. So I think it is really about spreading the word, sharing um, the experiences like you had, Jerry and me, and really feeling inspired to perhaps follow your path or follow a similar path or reach out or do more research, and really feel that there is, like you did, that there is hope out there. And I believe that there's so many people out right now, especially with our current geopolitical situation, where hope is getting diminished more and more and more, and it weighs down. It weighs down on our families, on our children. And I believe one of the reasons why we all came here onto this planet is to heal, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And so I'm really, really grateful for your work that you've done, Jeremy. And um, what do you think would be the first step if somebody listens to this radio show or the podcast here today? What would be a first step for somebody that feels inspired by your journey, by your experience, and by the results to take? Is it connect with you, go to your website, and is it um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they can connect through the website for sure. If I will say that like ibogaine is the most potent psychedelic on the planet. It's the strongest one for sure. I mean, it's not for everybody, so I think that depending on your situation, I think there are other avenues that people could take, whether it be MDMA or psilocybin or different avenues like that. But I think that's also important. I think that it's set and setting are a big deal. I wouldn't recommend just going to the store or going online and buying this stuff and taking it home. It helps to have somebody sit with you that you trust, that can guide you through it. And I think that it's important that you feel safe and that you're a safe space, and that the that you're looked after, because when you're in the medicine you can be in a vulnerable spot, so it's important to be safe and have a good setting and have intentions about it. You know I think it's important to have a coach, is kind of what I'm saying, somebody that can help you guide you through it. I we talk about having this available to everybody, and I don't disagree with that sentiment, but at the same time there needs to have a
the container? the container needs
Yeah,
to be there, and I believe the recognition and the understanding of the sacredness, not just of the medicine, but
exactly.
the
The
process,
respect.
the
Yeah.
respect, the way the ceremony has been held. And I don't think that there's anybody who hasn't gone through this process or this protocol that doesn't come out on the other side to recognize the sacredness of all of life. And while it's hard to describe really the journey in its height, really what is going on from your visuals and from the experience and that feeling of love and interconnectedness, everybody that goes through it, I think, has the same result. We recognize that we're all connected. We recognize that we're here to heal each other, and that's what I feel within you. And so again, deepest gratitude to the work and what you're bringing forward, and count me in. I'm there for you.
Yeah, and setting what you said there as well. And Michael, the reverence you're alluding to and intention, and never to forget some of the most important work after this work is the integration, is continuing to do the work, the journaling, the lifestyle adjustments, and all the different parts of it, because a lot of people, and we see it and hear about it, it's like a weekend event, and then they go back to their old lives. They have this great experience, they go back to their old lives, and nothing much changes. So
It's yeah, like there's work before, obviously I kind of alluded to that, but I mean, it's not a take a pill and you're done. Like I meditate every day. I do breath work. Journaling I struggle with. I fully admit that I struggle with that. Um, I pray. I will say that the spirituality part that came out of this, it was totally unexpected, but it is also something that has made my life more full.
beautiful.
Um, just to know that I'm loved and I have purpose, man, that's priceless. I don't know where I'd be without that.
Incredible. Wow. Well, that was probably the longest show we've done. From a radio perspective, I will say, but I was just riveted. I didn't want to interrupt or anything of that nature, because I was just so taken with your story, and the way you shared that was, again, I'm almost speechless. So thank you for doing all that great work. And again, for anybody watching and listening, projectlifespark.org is where you can reach out to Jeremy, learn more about the work, get more information. And of course, we're here on Conscious Living Radio. You'll find us on our website, consciouslivingradio.org. And as well, you can reach out to us anytime with any questions, as we do know a number of folks within our community in the spirit plant medicine world that can always help with this process. Because there's so much we could talk for another hour about policy, procedure, and so many other things. Anything you want to add as we close, Michael?
um I would like to close with a prayer that more and more people are recognizing the um, the power and the power of psychedelics, and opening up their hearts and their minds to a possibility for the healing of themselves, and it's so tremendously important right now that we come together and collaborate and cooperate um, across the planet, and share our wisdom and share our stories, and really take each other by the hand, and start that healing process, not just for ourselves, but again for our communities, and also for future generations. I think that's the calling of our time, and Germany is just one example, not just, but Germany is an example of what needs to be done. And thank you for stepping into that, and taking that responsibility.
It was a pleasure to be with you fellas tonight. Thank you for your time and thank you for letting me share my experience and my purpose. And like I said, I know I know we can do a lot of good with this. It's just a matter of finding the people and finding the funds, and it'll happen. But thanks again, and I really appreciate you guys' time. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
It's been our pleasure, Jeremy. And again, just I know there's its own excuse me, epidemic out there of PTSD and things, but I want people to know that there are ways, there are solutions, and there's a lot of great work being done out there that is not necessarily from a pharmaceutical approach. So do your research, do it wisely, do it smart, do it with intention. And if you're looking for information, one more time, it's projectlifespark.org. You've been listening to Conscious Living here on 100.5 CFRO FM in Vancouver. My name is Marc Caron, and I was here with my co-host, Michael Kraus. And until next time, everyone, take care of each other.
And be kind to each other.
Thanks again for watching and listening. Until next time.